So in this video, I'm going to try something a little different. I'm always reading new research in lots of different fields and studying psychology and neuroscience and just generally keeping on top of the latest discoveries and also doing research in lots of areas. And I thought it might be interesting to talk through some of this stuff and to capture it as is present for me. I'd like to look at this new study from the Salk Institute, and the headline really grabbed me, which is "The brain's ability to perceive space expands like the universe," and that is the headline from neurosciencenews.com, an aggregate of this kind of information. I'm not going to profess to be any kind of expert on neuroscience or this kind of thing, but what I will do is talk intuitively about what my comprehension of this study is in terms of the deeper meaning around it. It really caught my attention because there have been numerous studies, particularly in recent years, that have shown the correlation between the structure of the human brain and the cosmos itself. They are incredibly similar, if not identical, in their underlying structure, and it kind of reminds me of the Hermes Trismegistus quote, "As above, so below, as within, so without." It's almost as if our brains are mini universes, and that these patterns of nature expand as you go up and also as you go down as well into the microcosm of atoms. But I thought this was just so interesting that this study has found that the actual structure of the brain, the spatial kind of neural networks in the brain, expand with space. With spiritual practice, we talk a lot about expanding awareness, and it does feel in meditation that when you enter that space, the actual consciousness that you are expands and reaches out. Now, as we know, we're kind of balancing the more subtle forms of consciousness, the kind of spiritual forms or spiritual dimension of consciousness, with the material. But in a lot of ways, the brain is that bridge between both. And you can see that with neuroplasticity and the way in which the thoughts that you have, or even practices, and there have been studies that show practices like loving kindness meditation, alter the structure of the brain, including the brain waves themselves, but the actual physical structure. So our consciousness is always influencing and influenced by the material. And that appears to be the case with spatial understanding as well. This is so important because time and space are obviously fundamental qualities of reality, and yet consciousness is always the hard problem of science. It's hard to reconcile consciousness with time and space, and a lot of spiritual teachings will tell you that consciousness, or your true self, or cosmic intelligence, or cosmic consciousness, or God, is outside of space and time. In that sense, both time and space are illusions. And it's interesting that it's almost like we create the pattern of material space, not only in our material world, but in our brains as well. It's pretty crazy. But also, it makes me think of something I wrote about recently, which is the implicate and explicate order. A theory by David Bohm, someone that I admire a lot. He was friends with Jiddu Krishnamurti, and the pair had a lot of dialogue around the role of quantum physics and spirituality, and non-dual teachings in particular. And I related this idea to my article on the lighthouse, and the idea of an inner journey somehow having a spatial element to it, that you can move around the physical world in this kind of holographic universe, but there's also a feeling that you can move around your inner environment. Like there's a sense of movement, that you're going somewhere, that you're journeying within. And I wonder if there is this kind of implicate or invisible dimension that we do travel through in different ways. Some people will talk of astral travel, and that's not a field of expertise of mine, but it does raise some interesting questions about what it means to move, and what it means to move through space, and whether the physical representation of that, actually moving in the material world and traveling in certain ways, is also mirrored in our psychology and in our consciousness. So as I was thinking through this, another study that I read about recently came to mind, and that study found that meditation reorganizes the brain's spatial topography. And this is from Big Think. A new meta-analysis examined evidence of how meditation alters brain activity and connectivity. The authors found that meditation reorganizes the brain's spatial topography. Perhaps this explains why advanced meditators claim to experience non-dual awareness. That is a dissolution of the boundaries between the self and the environment, resulting in a state of unity with the world. Again, I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. I think that Big Think tend to be quite focused at times on like material dimensions. At least they tend to use that as a grounding for a lot of their speculation. I don't. So I see this as actually a byproduct, not a cause. Whereas a lot of people focused on neuroscience will always look to the brain almost as like the foundation of everything, whereas I would see it as consciousness. And it's just really interesting that by meditating, you're expanding the spatial topography of the brain in a similar way. And something that I didn't know in the original study is that this expanse and this changing of neural networks occurs in novel environments. So when someone goes to a new environment, their brain is changing to kind of map that out. And I wonder if it's similar, but in terms of consciousness, when you meditate, you're kind of mapping out consciousness as you expand your awareness into something that is more non-dual-esque. So it's really exciting and something to ponder. And I'd also be interested in your feedback and your thoughts on this. And if you have any comments to make, it would be really cool to hear from you.